I don't want to be working for a company that's constantly having me write the same bad code over and over and over again, right? We should be um, uh, building on that code to make it better, to make it more performant, to make it more accessible to the users, to make the user experiences um, more affordable for the users, in that they're able to do whatever task it is that they're doing more efficiently.
Layoffs, ghost jobs, AI. These are unprecedented times. Trying to find a job in the professional world, especially the tech sector, has never been harder. It seems the social contracts around job seeking have been all but torn up in pursuit of profits.
At the same time, there are plenty of folks out there finding new careers every day, whether through strong networking, creative approaches to job applications, or just sheer determination. There are those who have gone through the long, difficult job hunt and found success on the other end.
I'm Jason C. McDonald.
And I'm Michael Tharrington. This is On the Board, where we interview everyday people who've successfully landed jobs during the discouraging employment landscape of the last 2 years.
No out-of-touch influencers and dubious pay-to-win schemes here, just real experiences and practical insights. Marlon, thanks for joining us on the board. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite and thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
Awesome to have you here.
So just to kick off the conversation like we usually do, can you briefly share what it was like when you first found yourself back on the job market? And if I remember correctly, you started looking before you wound up back on the job market.
Yeah, that's correct. We have a shared background at a former employer, Jason, so I won't go too deep into that. But I never actually was in an employment gap at all. So that's kind of interesting about me is I've been really lucky and really fortunate to kind of something my dad's always told me, and something that has I've been lucky to do is it's always easier to find a job when you have a job. And so since I started working at 16, I've had a job. And so at our former employer, things were kind of rocky. The environment was really shaky, and I was started putting feelers out to my network that I was like, didn't formally post on LinkedIn, but definitely started putting feelers out that I was looking for other opportunities. And so with the opportunity that I'm in now came through my network, which was exciting and very fortunate.
Hey, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what kind of opportunities you were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually all over the place. I'm very recently a developer. I think I've been developing officially for 6 years. 6 years now? Yeah, 6 years. I guess that's not too recent anymore, but a lot's changed in 6 years. Especially I'm a React developer. A lot's changed for React in the past 6 years. But prior to that, I had been in grocery distribution, so logistics and things like that. My formal education is more geared towards education, and I was a secondary history teacher for quite a while. It wasn't until I left teaching that I had a friend that approached me with an opportunity. She was working as a liaison for the local community college who had just started rolling out uh, developer boot camps. So I kind of jumped in early into that kind of boot camp trend, um, and took a boot camp here at Central New Mexico Community College in full stack web development. And that's how I got introduced to dev. While I was there, I interviewed with a few local firms to the Albuquerque metro area, and ended up landing a job about 6 to 8 months after graduating the boot camp, um, at what was formerly known as RSI. So
Great. Yeah, it's really helpful. And just to get a little bit more, what was your kind of What is your main role, I guess, as you're working in React and working with web development? Do you have kind of a title that you were looking for when you were looking for a role, or were you just looking for sort of broad stroke React development roles?
At first, so I did not have any uh, experience in React at first at all. Originally, I was just looking for something in full stack web development. And so my formal training was in PHP and Angular. Um,
Yeah.
I've not touched PHP or Angular since I've left the boot camp, ironically. Um, and while I was at RSI, I became very much a generalist. Took my first paid role was a React role, but then I moved into a more kind of vanilla JavaScript role, working with legacy JavaScript and a legacy Java backend system. So that was a true full stack opportunity. And now um, I work for the Department of Defense, doing React development on the front end and Golang development on the back end. So still very much full stack, while putting the emphasis on the front end. Um, Coming out of the boot camp, it was very important to me to keep the emphasis on accessibility. And so I do a lot of talks about web accessibility. I still go back to the boot camp and talk to boot camp students, and I actually worked there for a short time as well. But I talk to them about accessibility and the importance of semantic HTML and ARIA controls on your in your JavaScript and so on and so forth. So yeah. So full stack with an emphasis on web accessibility, I guess, is what I was looking for and what I still aim to do.
So you mentioned that you got your current opportunity through your network, and that's something we keep hearing a lot. But I think what's interesting to me is that you, at the time that you were looking for this role, you had been in the industry for about 5 years, and you were able to build up that network. What are some ways that you were able to build that network as you were starting your dev career, or were you finding that it was actually not necessarily tech related and that you had contacts already?
Um, that's a great question. It was a little bit of both, to be honest. The guy that recruited me for my role at Blue Halo, which I'm currently in, is a longtime friend. I've known him for about 15 years now. Um, and he's been through several different sectors. We've actually worked several jobs together just out of sheer luck, and out of New Mexico being such a small community in general. Um, but Yeah, so it was a little bit of both. While I was in the boot camp, there was a huge emphasis on networking. And so I'm involved in a couple of local dev communities here in the Albuquerque metro area, um, and constantly revisit those, whether it be the React 505 group, or we have a Google developer group that I attend regularly. And again, the boot camp is another great resource. So it was staying plugged into those communities as well as um, staying plugged into my community outside of dev, because more and more we're seeing that a lot of people are moving into dev from other sectors, right? There's intersect, and I mean obviously technology is constantly being, I want to say, redefined, and how different tech, or excuse me, how different sectors intersect with technology. Um, so the guy that recruited me, we were both working in finance at a call center, and he had started working for a different finance firm. Just started coding applications for them while he was there to make his life easier and to kind of automate his work. When they took notice of him doing that, he was elevated into an actual tech job in that finance firm, and that's how he joined the industry. But yeah, again, just uh, staying involved in community, whether or not it was paid, right? Um, Staying involved in community and keeping open to the fact that my network, there's a lot of organic intersect into the tech community as it was. So
Um, you mentioned that you were a teacher prior to this as well. I'm curious, how have you been able to use your kind of teaching background to to both, better yourself when you're searching for jobs, but also kind of promote yourself as a developer and kind of have your own sort of unique your own unique background. Have you been able to use that to your advantage, or have you?
yeah, absolutely. And another great question. Um, I've been able to use it. I don't everywhere that I go, I fall into some sort of a teaching role. Whether it has been at um, I was my very first job was at McDonald's. And after 3 months of being at McDonald's, I became a team lead at 16. And a lot of the people that I was team leading were in some situations twice my age. And then I worked in grocery logistics. Again, became a team lead to teach people to do the job that I was doing. While I was there in the grocery logistics, I was finishing up my formal education so that I could become a teacher. Um, how has it served me is, I'm one that, and I think that you should be if you're in the tech sector, someone who's prepared to be a lifelong learner, and prepared to not stop learning. And with that, I've been able to teach people how to learn, and not only that, but I find that the best way that I learn is by doing it and then showing other people, and this is how I did it. Um, and not only that, but accepting that feedback from those people on how I learned and how I can do it better, right? I think that that's an important part of even being a teacher is being a learner and accepting feedback.
So lots of doing and showing. Did that impact your portfolio at all? Like how did you build out your portfolio as a developer?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always building mini like example applications, especially anytime that I give, because I give I mentioned it earlier, an accessibility talk at least once every 3 months or so to the boot camp students. And just because of the nature of the way that JavaScript changes, the way that the WCAG changes, I've been able to change that every time I've given that talk. And so uh, having those little mini applications is nice because then I have organically little pieces of software or what have you to point to and say, oh, you can click this GitHub link or what have you to provide that to recruiters, to provide that on my resumes. So it definitely impacted my portfolio. It keeps me engaged in the learning process and it gives me tangible pieces of software to show people whenever they're asking, well, what are you talking about? A lot of people, whenever you mention web accessibility, they have no idea even what that means. So it's nice to have something to point to.
Totally. On the note of web accessibility, how did you end up going down that specific route? And like whether it's passion, or it also is a specific kind of a more niche thing that you felt like you could target and work in, or how did that just come about for you?
Yeah, so I was in a relationship a couple years back now, and my stepdaughter at the time, who has passed since she passed over kind of the height of the COVID epidemic. She was disabled, and so she had a disability called trisomy 18 or Edwards syndrome. I'm sure you know Down syndrome is an extra pair of the 21st chromosome. Trisomy 18 is the same. It's just an extra pair on the 18th chromosome. Um, and it was because of her and the way that like her IEP teachers would come in and use technology for her betterment that I was like, this is why the web should be accessible for everybody. And so she was a huge motivator, a huge Kickstarter for kind of that passion in general. I started realizing that disability, because and don't get me wrong, like Twyla was never a person who was going to be able to live independently. She was never going to be able to log on to the PNM.com web portal to pay her power bill or what have you. But I knew that frustration, right, of going onto the PNM.com website and paying my power bill, and knew the frustration of a web page that was inaccessible, even for a person who had different sort of learning disabilities and things like that. And so I was like, we need to make it so that anyone, regardless of their level of ability, in as much as they are able, can use a piece of software. And it was because of her, because of the teachers and their use of technology to teach her how to communicate, that kind of fueled that passion towards web accessibility.
Gotcha.
So imagine a lot of times when you're interviewing, you run into things that you don't know that they ask you about. Like you mentioned earlier, that you work in React now, but you hadn't done a lot of work in React previously. How do you overcome that in an interview when they are asking about an expertise that maybe you don't have yet, but you're confident you can learn it? How do you convince them I can learn this thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually came across that in my most recent interview with Blue Halo, and which, gosh, almost a year now since I interviewed with Blue Halo, um, where they were asking me questions about, gosh, I think it was um, caching data in React. Like, what's the best way to do that? And I had not had too much experience with that in the past. So I started asking questions in those interviews. Feel empowered to ask questions is what I would say. And be candid. I know that I was watching one of your prior podcast episodes, and I don't think that honesty and integrity is necessarily valued by the other side of the fence, as far as like we are job seekers, right? And we are encouraged to be have honesty and integrity. That's not necessarily true on the other side, where integrity might not come through, honesty might not come through. You might not get a call back. You might not. They might not be candid with you about the fact that like you're facing 50 other candidates. I would say that bring that honesty and that integrity to the table. Say things like, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, and ask questions. I think that a lot of the time when I've said, I don't know, I've followed it up with, but what would you do? What piece of software, what library do you know of that could help with that? Not only does that give you an opportunity to learn and to have you now I can write down, oh, React query, right, to for data caching from an API call, because that's what I use now is React query. It makes it so that there's less API calls if the data has not changed, because it brings it back from the cache instead of making another API call, which is cool. Um, uh, I lost my train of thought. It gives you the opportunity to leave the interview with pieces of information that you can then go to research, and it shows the recruiters that you have a vested interest in learning and a vested interest in becoming a better dev for them, and not just for yourself, right? So.
Awesome.
Makes a
That's a
lot of
great piece
sense.
of advice. On that note of asking interviewers questions, do you have any kind of go-to questions that you like to ask a place, kind of in your pocket, ready to go if you're you get to that end of the interview and they open the floor up for you to ask questions? Is there anything that you kind of find yourself asking again and again to kind of probe a company or?
Yeah, so I think my two go-tos are with regard to culture and with regard to continuing education. What opportunities are you going to offer me to continue becoming a better developer in the role that you're going to have me in? Um, I don't want to be working for a company that's constantly having me write the same bad code over and over and over again, right? We should we should be um, uh, building on that code to make it better, to make it more performant, to make it more accessible to the users, to make the user experiences um, more affordable for the users, in that they're able to do whatever task it is that they're doing more efficiently. For me, it's I provide pieces of software that satellite operators can use to interface with satellites and things like that. Um, so yeah, what opportunities are you going to afford me? What time are you going to afford me to be a better learner, to be a better developer for you? And the second is as a culture question. What does like a day in the life of an X company dev look like? Am I going to be expected to be, hands on the keyboard 8 hours a day? Because to me, that's not realistic. And that's not to say that I have not worked 10, 12-hour days in the company that I'm at now. I have, out of my own personal choice because I enjoy what I do so much. Um, but to me, asking someone to sit with their hands on the keyboard for 8 hours a day, logging their keystrokes or what have you, to put together performance reports on people, that to me is unrealistic. So yeah, education and culture are two huge questions that I'm going to be asking about.
Kind of along those lines, yeah. Because I mean, Bossware, it's creepy some of the stuff they're coming up with now. And did you encounter anything in any interviews where you're just like, "Wow, this is scary." I mean, here we are the day after Halloween, so it's perfect occasion for scary stories. You got any?
um, I I'm trying to think of one that like in a situation where it was truly scary. I did a lot of research in the role that I'm in now, only because it is a Department of Defense role. I honestly never thought I'd be in a role where I'd be working for the government. It was almost something um, that I had said I'm never going to do that whenever I started writing code. Um, for different ethical reasons. I think early on, I interviewed with a company who was pulling a lot of public data, and I don't. It was not a huge concern at the time, but something that I would caution anyone looking at a role in the dev community is looking at what kind of software are you going to be writing and how that software can be used, um, how that software can be used in the public to compromise individual safety, individual security, and individual privacy. I know that I've come across that a couple of times just when you're working with public data, and with large public data sets, especially as we're kind of coming into a world that data is more and more available. Um, just yeah, just looking at how people's individual privacy can be impacted and what kind of hand you have to play in that. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and I was talking about the new Meta lenses or Meta
Mm.
glasses or whatnot, um, and someone had developed an open source application for those to where you could like look at somebody's face. It would do a quick facial recognition on them, and in your Google or your Meta lenses, it would pull up all kinds of information on them. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I can't even imagine. I talked to my partner about it, and she was like, can you imagine, like, as a woman walking around on the street on the daily anyway, we have to be looking over our shoulder. For someone to have that much power to be able to look at your face and then immediately have a phone number, an address,
Hmm.
what have you. So crazy. Uh, so I've never come across that directly, but there's been a couple roles that I've interviewed for where they were sending me large public data sets, and I was like, oh, this is kind of wild. Even one where um, I was able to look at the data set and I was able to determine that, oh my goodness, like all of these low income apartments where there's X amount of families where they're in a single parent household, and then across the river where it's no longer apartments, it's all houses, they're all single parent households again. And I was like, well, what does that data say about this? Well, the single parent households on one side are all single moms, the single parent households on the other side are all single dads. That's interesting. What kind of uh, deductions can you make based off of that data? So I don't know. It's interesting. I think just looking at what someone's asking you to do, and what assumptions they're asking you to make based off of the data that you're pulling.
Yeah, the classic developer glitch, which is we spend so much time thinking about what we can do. We don't spend enough time thinking about whether we should. And so
Right.
next thing you know, it's like, oh well, hey, we built this robot that can carry a machine gun. It's like, great. Why?
Why?
Because we could. Well, good job. You just built the Terminator. We really didn't
Right.
need that.
So when you're assessing these places, you're kind of assessing them on like a value standard and sort of looking at their data policies and trying to get a sense of like, are they going to benefit people or are they going to hurt people? You're kind of looking at this from a value standpoint, then, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially in a world that's becoming more and more technically influenced, we have to definitely take into consideration the ethics of what we do. Um, yeah, it's a huge thing.
So it sounds like you're doing a lot of your stuff through the networking. Did you apply to any jobs the more traditional way, or was it purely through networking? And if you did apply the traditional way, like resume online, did you notice any differences between that versus referrals?
Yeah. Referrals definitely in my experience, well, and again, I mean, even the job at RSI was initially a referral. I actually worked for RSI on two separate occasions. Once was a referral, the second time was because they were glad to have me back. Um,
I can imagine
uh,
why.
but yeah, I did apply to a few jobs while I was kind of in between homes in an apartment, and I did not receive any bites, and it was not for lack of trying. I was, you know, contacting recruiters, following up with them. You don't typically hear back from your recruiter, which is unfortunate. You have to kind of probe them for hey, how did this interview go? This interview felt great on my end. What was the vibe from the interviewer's standpoint? Um, and so I did not get much luck with that. It was definitely out of just being well networked, and so fortunately that I'm well networked, and I would encourage. I know that it's kind of hard in the community that we're in, right? We work with computers because maybe we're not people. And I'm not a people. that much. I do have to force myself out of my comfort zone to be able to even make up. I have a phone call that I've had to make for no joke 4 weeks now, and it's just because I don't like being on the phone because I'm not really much of a talker if I'm not in a comfortable kind of atmosphere. So kudos to you both for making this a very comfortable atmosphere because I feel like I can't shut up right now.
Well, now I feel
Um,
really honored that you take my phone calls too.
um, and so yeah, it has just been being well networked and then as well when someone approaches me for an opportunity. Hey, this is, I mean, that's how I got into development, right? Was the that community liaison who was a friend at the community college said, "Hey, this boot camp is, I think, a great opportunity for you. I'd like to see you get into it." And I put it off for a year or two before getting into the boot camp. And I'm so glad that I did because it really changed my life. Being open to hearing that from people, right? Hey, I think this might be a good opportunity for you. If they're in your network and they know you well enough and they're approaching you for this might be a great opportunity, then maybe it is, and maybe step out of your comfort zone to do it. I've not had much success with applying cold applying for jobs, I guess it would be. um, yeah, it's just not benefited me, and it's unfortunate because right, we're people are job seeking more and more, and hmm, it's so discouraging for me, not from a standpoint of like, oh, I've because like I said early on, I've been lucky enough to consistently have employment since I've been 16. Um, it's discouraging for me for other people when I see these developers that are cold applying for jobs and they don't get recruited because you see the value in those people, um, but the recruiter or the interviewers don't see the value in them. And that's just, like I said, discouraging for me on their behalf, because it's like, gosh, you are missing out on some talent here. But again, it's all about the network. And I think being open to hearing that. I have a friend who I keep telling him, hey, I think this role would be good for you. And he's like, well, he's discouraged because he has been turned down so many times, or he's put in 200 plus applications and hasn't heard back on a single one. So,
The front door's
Yeah.
broken. Go in the back.
yeah.
And one thing I'm hearing from you just describing this, you say you're fortunate to have this network, and of course being fortunate is part of it, but also it's a lot of work building that network that you have to kind of step outside your comfort zone to make it work. And I heard you say earlier that you've done some talks, I think, as well, and that's like obviously putting yourself out there in front of people and part of the work of making the network work, I guess. There's not really a question in there. Sorry, I just blabbing on. I think I don't know. What does it feel like to you? Any advice for folks that are trying to build their networks about how to go about that?
Yeah. Looking for those opportunities, I think that like I said, I'm not um super social in general. I'm not a super people person. I have built this portfolio of being able to talk about a specific subject, and I think it's just being invested in that subject matter. So maybe it is finding something that you're very interested in and building a little bit of a portfolio to be able to talk to it in front of a group of people. The guy that had recruited me for the role that I'm currently in, he had never spoken to anybody or spoken in front of anybody before a couple months ago. But he's super good at Golang and loves to talk about concurrency in Golang. And he would talk about it in front of all of the people, in front of all of his coworkers. And I was like, hey, I'm going to name drop him now. I was like, Alex, you need to put together a talk, for I think that you'd be good at talking about this in front of a group of people. And he was already in the Google developer group, and he actually attends way more than I do. And he ended up putting together a talk, and now he talks about Golang in front of people. So yeah, it's just being open to moving out of your comfort zone. I think, finding a specified niche that you're interested in that maybe not a lot of people have heard about or do talk about. And even if it's not that, you know what I mean? If you can talk to something in an informed way, there's someone's gonna want to hear it. Um, so yeah.
Well, I realize we're kind of running up on time here. Do you have any closing advice for anyone out there still looking for work?
Yeah, don't get discouraged. I think that we're at a time right now where um, recruiters are going to start to see the and maybe not recruiters, but companies in general are going to start to see kind of the pitfall of hiring lower skilled AI generated dev answers, right? And I know this is something that I've talked about with Jason is eventually skilled developers are going to need to come in and clean up a lot of the mess that AI has made with regard to people's code bases. Don't get discouraged. Keep plugged into your network and be willing to go outside of your comfort zone for an opportunity. That's how I landed the role that I'm in now, and it wasn't without kind of wrestling with myself as like, is this a role that I really want to be in? Um, I said earlier that I never saw myself in a kind of government contract, Department of Defense position, and yet here I am, um, directly informing the United States Space Force as far as their code base is concerned. Um, and it's been a real journey. It's huge. I think that just staying outside of your comfort zone and not being discouraged, um, even if it's 20 minutes of code every day, um, sending an application once a week, making a follow-up email on an opportunity, realizing you haven't heard back on that opportunity in a couple weeks. I'm gonna shoot this recruiter an email. You might be surprised.
Marlon, thank you so much for joining us. It's been marvelous chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marlon.